I had the pleasure of speaking with Nick Pardini, co founder of the wealth management firm Spearhead Advisors, as well as creator of his own YouTube channel, Analyzing Finance with Nick. With Nick's in depth understanding of macroeconomic trends, I really enjoyed his perspective of what is happening with the labor market, especially the difficulties surrounding it. I hope that this discussion can provide some value to you, and thank you so much for your support. When you look at what your dollar is able to buy compared to even just 20 years ago, the difference is substantial. What do you believe is one of the biggest impacts that lagging wages as a whole has had on the individual worker?
Well, there's a lot of things. First, I think the lagging wage problem is a lot worse than a lot of people perceive because you're benchmarking it against a CPI, which has a lot of calculation flaws, especially how they measure housing inflation. They use an index called owner's equivalent rent, which is basically you give the BLS calls homeowners and says, if you were to rent out your house today, how much would you rent it for? And all these people don't follow the rental market. And so it's not really that appropriate. And also sometimes it lags because of leases turning over and all of that. So, and they don't even, a lot of it doesn't even count just straight up housing appreciation if you're trying to buy. It's, again, it's all based on rent. And the cost of owning a home has gone up a lot more than the cost of renting in most cities. And so that's also another flaw. But the point is, if you use a more appropriate benchmark, just as a crude proxy, look at the price of gold. It's more volatile, and gold has periods where it goes down. But the price of gold has been a pretty good proxy for purchasing power. When gold goes down, that means that the average person's purchasing power is going up, and when gold goes up, it means that the average person's purchasing power is going down. And if you look at wages priced in gold, um, that they went down a lot in the 1970s, recovered a bit in the 90s and early 2000s, and went back down pretty much the level they were at the late 1970s and the 2010s, and it's been there since. Uh, and if you look at other things such as food or housing prices or any sort of other like consumer good or financial asset, they've basically been stable against gold, even real estate. And so a lot of stuff has gone down against gold, like food. That's probably I think the only thing that's gone down faster than wages is actually the cost of food. But apart from that, like oil prices, housing prices, stock prices, uh, they've the price of a new car, they've all kind of basically been relatively flat or slightly declining versus gold, whereas wages versus gold have been a complete collapse.
Something that's really interesting that I saw on the Economic Policy Institute's website is that from 1948 to 1982, the average annual growth of productivity compensation was almost equivalent to one-on-one ratio. Since then, productivity has risen 61.8%. And when adjusted for inflation, wages have risen 17%. What do you think that this is also having on the burnout of individuals? I think in some ways, you could say, yes, individuals don't want to work anymore because they've been burnt out for the past 4 years, especially since the pandemic.
So I don't think I failed to answer your question, last question. So I'll go back to that. And it's really the when you're not paid enough to basically cover the cost of living or just barely cover the cost of living, then you basically have no incentive to try to work hard because you don't really see a possible better future. Like in many major metropolitan areas, somebody who's making 80,000 a year is not living that much worse of a life, like the life than somebody making 180,000 a year because of progressive taxes, because of the prohibitive cost prohibitiveness of buying a house. So the common and a bunch of other variables. So really, basically, if you're in that's the middle class range. Essentially, you're the only difference to the guy who's making 180,000 versus 80,000 is that he could save a little bit more for his retirement and go on a few nicer vacations. But in markets such as Southern California, neither of them are buying a house, and neither of them can really afford to raise a family on that. And so it's like, what's the difference? Like the conventional middle to upper middle class lifestyle that people strive for has become a lot more expensive, whereas the ability to just get by, whether it's due to a stronger social safety net or less social stigma of parental support, whether it's living with your parents or financial support from your parents, has made the floor a lot easier to get to. So more people, I think, now than ever are doing okay and getting by. There's a lot less abject poverty in the world, especially in developed countries. But the people going to the level of thriving and what is stereotypically considered the American dream has gotten a lot more cost prohibitive. And then, so with the earnings report point, I'll go back to that. I mean, companies have been recording quarterly earnings basically since the 1930s and 40s. I don't really think that the pressure for quarterly earnings reports have any impact on the gap between productivity and wages. Um, I think that the gap of productivity and wages I talk about in a video that I did called The Decline in Quality of Human Capital. I think it's a product of an education system that doesn't incentivize people to earn their keep. Like there are certain industries where wages have kept up with earnings, particularly finance and particularly in the capital markets side of finance. And the reason is these people know their worth. They know how much they contribute to P&L, and they negotiate hard to keep their cut. Whereas people who are less financially savvy or can't directly tie, their salespeople too, their salaries have gone up proportionately with company revenue and profits because they know that they're bringing in a certain amount of revenue to the business, and they're like, look, I'm not going to work for less. I want to get paid based on the revenue I'm bringing in. Other industries where that's difficult to quantify, those are the ones who are falling behind. Uh, Other side of it too is that, as I talked back to the declining quality human capital video, outside the education system, is the fact that a lot of jobs have been made easier today. So, like being an accountant today is objectively not as difficult as it was, say, in 1990. In 1990, you have to write your own spreadsheets by hand and do a lot of these calculations with one of those little 80s calculators with the little receipt line on it. And it, or, and you would have to go physically talk with all your clients and have to have hire an assistant to handle all your scheduling. It's a lot more difficult. And with the internet and digital technology, and especially become accelerated thanks to things like AI and a lot of just and time saving SaaS products, the amount of actual work needed to produce the same amount of output is considerably lower. But that in theory should raise wages. But at the same time, which is what the economists I think fail to miss, is that it lowers the bar on who can do that job. So a lot more people can do a basic accounting job today. It requires a lot less cognitive skill and time than a uh, than it would in the 1990s. And so I think that's a big driver here. The lowering time should increase amount per hour, and in a all things equal world, people would just be working less hours. But the software advancements have also reduced the amount of skill. So you can have a lower skilled person previously do what is a higher skilled job, and therefore that's more competition for labor. And then there's other variables too, such as increased rates of immigration, um, a more a general pool of bigger labor pool in general due to people who used to not be allowed in the workforce working more, higher education rates. So there's more college grads competing for the same amount of jobs. So there's a lot of other variables that have greatly increased the labor pool supply, and technology has reduced the skills needed to do a job. Like, why should somebody like in corporate middle management, all they do is shuffle emails around, uh, be paid the same as a corporate middle management person who had to do a lot more actual physical cognitive work in a previous generation?
Something that I've been thinking about is at first, you want what is the most convenient. And as that becomes less convenient, you then want something else. And so what I've been noticing is I used to think that it was incredibly nice to be able to just call customer service and have them take care of a situation, say with a banking issue or something of that matter. Now I feel like it is such a headache. I would rather go into the branch and have an individual take care of that. Now, I worked in a bank, so I think that's kind of a poor example because I think a lot of people would do anything other than go into a bank. But do you think that there may be a shift in actually wanting a higher quality individuals to take care of some of these low skill tasks? Or do you think that this is going to be completely just outsourced and dominated by artificial intelligence?
I think there will be a decreased demand on it, but the price of it will be too high for most people to pursue it. And then the other factor, really, that I forgot to mention in the previous comment about driving wages down is globalization. I don't know if you heard the elephant curve of labor.
I have not. I'm very interested though.
And so, like, wages have gone up a lot from, say, like the 0th to the 80th percentile and then the top 10, but like the 70th through the 90th percentile has been down or flat in real terms. And that's basically the lower and middle classes of the developed countries basically losing their wealth to the lower middle and upper classes of the emerging world. So a lot of those productivity and income gains were just redistributed globally.
Wow, that's incredibly interesting.
Because if you look on a worldwide basis, not just the United States and Europe, but the entire world, that gap is not there.
Artificial intelligence has already taken over 14% of American jobs, at least. As I think ChatGPT is supposed to do another massive upgrade here within the next half a year. I'm not exactly sure on the time frame. I think it's becoming more apparent than ever how quickly this is going to replace a lot of these unskilled jobs. I think what we're also seeing is actually that it's going to replace a lot of medium to higher skilled jobs as well. What do you think the impact is going to have on that when it comes to individuals wanting to work? It's kind of hard wanting to start a career when you have that thought in your mind of I might be replaced in a year or 2 years anyway. It's a question I think that is on a lot of individuals' minds.
I could see it going both ways, to be honest with you. Speaking of that, I just found this new app called Suno. I don't know if you heard of it.
I've not.
It's like ChatGPT for songwriting. Like you can either write your own lyrics with the help of ChatGPT or just by yourself, or you can have them write it for you. And you could say, I want a song about my sister's birthday next week in with a country music trio singing it, and it will make it for you, real like within 30 seconds.
That's unreal.
The genre, you could choose the gender of the voice. You can choose the length of the song approximately. You put your own lyrics, or you can just give them like a prompt for the theme and they'll write lyrics for you. You can choose the language. It's like, it's basically has the chance of putting a lot of like songwriters and music people on the chop block.
Something that I would like to say on that is I remember when iPhones first came out and my mom got the first iPhone, and it was one of the coolest things that I could see the weather on the phone. And then when I got my own phone, it was like the ability to have notes and just like these little things on a phone was like revolutionary. But now I still am writing the majority of my notes on the back of an envelope. I still just walk outside and whatever happens happens. When I hear things like you can get whatever song you want by whatever artist, instinctively I'm like, that's cool because that hasn't been a thing before. However, I think that in a large magnitude of ways, people still want the personal experience. I also think I'm over here in most evenings, I put on Nat King Cole. That is much older music. I don't think that I would get that same feeling on a human level by having a Sonos or whatever it was that was called and say, "Hey, make me a song that Nat King Cole would do," or something like that. It feels like we're losing some of the authenticity that I think a lot of humans are really craving. Do you think that I'm wrong on this, or
Yeah, but that's kind of missing. The point is really there are certain ambitious people who will want to start and build businesses who will leverage this technology to scale a lot faster. Like as a small business owner myself, like not AI specifically, but all these technical tools that have come out in the last 25 years, it's probably allowed me to run a company with 1/10 of the labor force that I would have needed to 25 years ago. And also just it makes it a lot easier to comply with a lot of regulatory things and getting message communication out to the right people and being able to meet with more prospective customers because you don't have to get on a plane every time. So for the enterprising entrepreneur, this is an asset. For somebody who doesn't want to put in the work to start a business, and not everybody's cut out for that, you have a lot of sacrifices you have to make to go on that path, both personally, financially, and a lot of professional risk that a lot of people just don't want to stomach. Yeah, these are working against you. If you are a cost to a company and they have solutions to lower the cost, you're going to be on the chop block. And if the easier your job is to be repeatable, and whether it's high skill, low skill, college degree, no college, because the AI, it's not just the AI, there's physical robots coming too, such as mobile aloha to replace a lot of domestic labor. So if you are a cost of something that needs to get done and it could be done in a standardized way that doesn't really require any sort of creativity or minimal creativity, yeah, it's discouraging because you're going to be replaced unless you're entrepreneurial enough to uh, create some intrinsic value independent of the task itself.
I think that you are absolutely right. When I was thinking about that topic, I was thinking more of a creative avenue. I think that the demand for creatives will still be up there because I think again you want that authentic experience. But you're
How
absolutely
many YouTube channels have you seen that have built and almost entirely out of AI?
yeah, but I also watch none of them. I mean, sometimes I get on there, but then it feels cheaply done, and I would imagine it's gonna get better, of course, but I think that for myself, maybe I'm just a little bit different on this. I just want to see a person and I want to know that they did some research. I want to know that at least they're sitting in front of a camera and I can kind of feel like I'm having a human interaction. I personally believe that you just can't replace a human being. And I think that as we've distanced ourselves from the community and society so much since 2020, the need for that is higher than ever. So I actually think we're going to want to see more individuals make YouTube than the faceless channels.
For me, it depends on the when it comes to YouTube. Some of the faceless YouTube channels, you want a simple answer to a question, like how does a bank work? I mean, it'd be nice if they had somebody like me talking about it, but like if it's basic enough of a question, like especially if it's like a math problem, I don't care if it's an AI bot telling me the answer.
So it helps on the search terms. Like I don't think a faceless channel could do a conversation like this. But if you just said, what is the unemployment rate? You could have someone just or
Yeah,
some
or how
AI.
does BLS calculate the unemployment rate? Like that would be something AI could probably do better than us.
Absolutely. It would take me like 8 minutes because I'd also want to break down every single aspect of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've done some of those type of quick videos, and I probably still do some of them, but the AI can do it a lot faster than me. Probably better presentation. But in terms of like use things that require subjectivity or some sort of foresight, because AI really only can go use past data to generate what it has. It can't really um, derive insight for something that hasn't happened yet or is out of the parameters that the AI is digging through. It only can really base its knowledge on the previous content that is produced and the previous knowledge that is on the internet.
I think I want to shift just a bit because I, again, want to reiterate the fact that I believe that people do want to work. When I recently made one of the videos, Why It Feels Impossible to Get a Job, I broke down that when we record our unemployment rate, we use U3. So it just shows individuals that are technically qualified as unemployed, which if you watch that video, you'll realize how the metrics are
Yeah,
absolutely
I
skewed.
understand the difference in U3 and U6.
Okay, so U6. So when you break it down that way, it looks like there's 16 million individuals fighting for 8 million jobs, and you have to consider the fact that there's no way that all of those 8 million jobs are one real. there's definitely some ghost jobs involved in there. And then you also have to consider the fact that most of those jobs are part time and do not afford really any sort of quality of
There's
living.
also a skill gap. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I assume I am. Do you mind breaking it down just a little bit more?
That a lot of the newer jobs require skills that the unemployed labor force does not have. Like, say if the new jobs are AI programmers, if the people who are laid off are people who are commercial bankers, like, even if they have a college degree, the commercial bankers are not qualified to be AI programmers.
Where do you see things going here in the future? I mean, all we talked about was all of the massive issues, which are important to discuss, but I like to say that there's at least some hope. What do you think are some of the positive things that we could be shifting towards?
I think you're going to see the housing prices. This is negative depending on if you're a homeowner or a prospective homeowner. But I think that you'll have continued uptrend until you see the demographic waterfall of the boomers just aging out or transitioning on to the afterlife, to put it nicely. And you'll have a big opening of housing supply due to just attrition. And this happened in Japan. There's a big waterfall in the early 90s. Uh, in Japan, you can buy a house in like their equivalent of Seattle for $130,000. That's like 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath, and that's because the population isn't going up. I mean, if immigration politics changes in a radical way, where we just absorb all of those, um, the native-born population declining with more skilled labor, then that might not be an issue. Like, look at places like Canada and Australia, where they have very high immigration rates relative to their base population. They have some of the biggest housing bubbles in the world, partially driven by a refuse. But I think the reason I'm a little more optimistic for America is that the politics will change too, because the people who have been the staunchest anti-development people are also the oldest generation who currently owns the property. Like, if you look at the statistics, people say that over half of the housing stock is owned by people 65 and over, and 2/3 is owned by people 55 and over.
Yeah, boomers own 38% of all real estate nationwide, which is quite interesting.
I thought it was higher than that, honestly.
I think it's the proportion of boomers that own homes. It might be that what it is that you're referencing.
Well, the portion of boomers that own homes is well over 70%.
I think, yeah, I think that you're right. Regardless of the fact, it's an alarming amount, especially compared to individuals that are younger that are trying to afford a home.
So yeah, and then you have a lot of things. You're starting to already see it with college. Like, college costs adjusted for inflation are down from their highs in 2016, 2017. And it's really just a matter of the fact that you just have less people going to college. Um, One, you have the enrollment cliff on demographics. There's just less 18-year-olds today than there were 10 years ago. And then you just have a lot of people say, oh, it's not worth it, especially for second tier private schools. I talked about this in my video. Is it worth going to college still? And outside of the Ivy Leagues and a few other prestigious universities and the UC system here in California, uh, enrollment sizes are shrinking, and that is putting downward price pressure on college. And yeah, that's probably going to get worse because birth rates kept going down, and there's going to be less people willing to go to college. And so that college cost problem is going to fix itself. There'll be a few small colleges that close down as casualties of this. We're already starting to have like multi-decade highs in college closures the last few years via this. But so that might be a leading indicator of what happens to housing and other costs as the generations in the future are smaller than the previous ones. Like, right now, we have this level where you still have the same amount of consumption because these boomers who are working are retiring. There's still demand to buy stuff, but they're not supplying labor, which is partially driving inflation, particularly wage inflation, is that there's less people to produce the stuff and the services that the constant amount of demand, or still increasing amount of demand. But then when these retirees start to not demand as much stuff, or they're just simply less of them, you're going to have a new equilibrium. So that might be the way you're going to be optimistic, is this is just like the food of the python going through the snake. And then we just happen to be at the point where um, it looks the worst for the younger generation.
In a lot of ways, I can't remember the last time that I did any sort of substantial consumption. A lot of my friends were all incredibly frugal. I think the ability for younger individuals to be able to consume at the magnitude of previous generations, it's extremely difficult. I do believe, on the other hand, social media is an excellent marketing tool that's allowed a lot of people to feel like they need to consume more than they are doing. But I think that that will also, in itself, get remedied as time goes on. Um, I think I think that this overall conversation is very difficult to break down because, again, there's such a multitude of different factors. But any other topics that you believe need to be mentioned on why individuals may be decentivized to want to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could put it if you want to put it in a simple phrase, you got to make hard work pay again. And I think there's a declining correlation between hard work and success for a number of reasons. I'm not saying it's negative or zero. If that was the case, we'd be living in Soviet Russia. But the it used to me say like, uh, I don't. I guess my hand's not. I got to do it this one. But like, it used to be like this, the slope. Now it's maybe more like this. It's still positive, but it's less positive. And there's a few reasons for that. One, you have a the housing issue, which we've repeated. It's just like, if you don't feel like you can ever buy a house or have a traditional family, it's not just house; it's a lot of other things. I talked about this in my video. And if you find it annoying me citing my other YouTube video
No, no, no. Please continue.
about how moral degeneracy is popular because it's affordable, whereas like the cost of things such as weddings, sending kids to college, which I think is improving, but it's still high, housing, and the like, but it's considered in our society the morally responsible things to do, raising kids in general, I've gone are the things I've gone up the most versus inflation. So that discourages people. The other thing is that technology commodifying a lot of jobs, and that people are at risk of being made obsolete is discouraging. Uh, the other thing is inflation. You have a government who cannot manage its balance its spending, and they basically, with the decision to do QE3 in 2012, effectively decided, look, we're going to solve this not through raising taxes or cutting spending or a combination of the two, like Europe tried to do and failed at with their austerity measures. We're just going to print money. And the system is, apparently, the public finances are somewhat dependent on inflation being higher than the interest being paid out. And years of low interest rates created the YOLO culture indirectly, and also the idea that, like, what's the point in saving because I'm not getting compensated for it. That's the high interest rates actually now, I think, would inspire people to work more because they see, look, I actually can collect a return on my savings without having to risk it in the stock market. And so, therefore, and then also just the randomness, it seems like, in the market. I talked about this in a video called Financial Nihilism, how things that may have no intrinsic value, like cryptocurrencies or NFTs or meme stocks, go up and make people fortunes randomly, or people start these tech companies that never make any money, yet they're able to sell them for to a big acquirer or have them go public at a valuation of greater than $1 billion. And they're like, they burned cash the whole time. It's like this thing never generated any profit, but there are a few people who are able to play the game of hot potato and get rich in San Francisco, whereas most of us who try to create businesses that have to make money from day one because they're not venture type companies, feel shafted and are not going to get to that point or not get there nearly as fast. And this winner takes all nature of the internet, and you see it with YouTube, like, you and I are in the top 5% of YouTubers, and I wouldn't, and neither of us are living in beachfront houses in Miami or Southern California. So like it's a very skewed to the left distribution where there's a relatively few winners and they're really big, yeah, and everybody else kind of just doesn't does just okay. And that is very discouraging, especially since social media, the people who are winning or pretending to win more likely are bragging about it all the time. And it's like, you see a lot of these things. It's like, oh, you don't have a house. You don't have all these things you want. Well, it's your fault. And that's partially true. There's a lot of lazy people out there, and video games and cheaper basic entertainment has been also something that's affected motivation. So there's a point to that. It's easier to do just okay now than ever, as I mentioned before. However, like there's such thing as things being too hard being a demotivator as well as being too easy. Like people like the self-esteem movement, like when I was a kid in the 90s and early 2000s. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the idea is that you could fix a lot of social problems by giving kids higher self-esteem and making them feel better about themselves and having high self-worth just for existing. And by making things too easy and giving everybody a trophy metaphorically, it created a sense of entitlement to a lot of people, and also um, made them not want to work hard because they thought everything would be easy, like being the first level in a video game. And so when it got a little bit challenged, they couldn't handle it. But and we've corrected on that side as a society, saying like, oh, life's not easy. But on the same time, they had a point in the sense if life is too hard, you're not going to be motivated. Like in like the labor productivity is much lower in developing economies where they have more rigid class systems and you know you're not getting ahead. And it's not that these people are fundamentally less intelligent necessarily or less educated. I think it also has to do with the fact that they're like, look, our class system is very hardly codified. I'm never going to advance. Why should I bother to put any effort in above the minimum? Like, that's another, like, you can have the problem people giving up because life is too hard or accomplishing a goal is too hard just as much as it's too easy. Like, classic example is becoming a doctor. A lot less people are motivated becoming a doctor today than say my grandfather's generation, uh, because it's like a 1 to 2% acceptance rate for most medical schools, and the people who are applying to medical schools are already the people who are the smartest biology students in undergrad. It's not your average Joe is going to apply to medical school, and the AMA effectively has a cap in the size of medical school classes to protect the salaries of existing doctors. But by doing that, they're making it so hard that most new doctors don't want to do it. And then not doesn't even count the prohibitive cost of going to medical school, which is another $300,000 likely in student loan debt. Because even those people that fortunately had parents pay for their undergrad likely don't have the money to send them to medical school too. And I think this medical school dilemma, it might be the classic example of something being too hard that's attainable, and so people just give up. Like the solution would be to increase the class sizes of medical school without lowering the difficulty of the content, which means you give more people the chance, but still only people who are smart enough to be doctors who actually make it through. But that would be at the risk of salaries of current doctors, which is why the AMA would never approve such a thing. But you need to have that kind of flatteners. Like you widen the pool of people who can compete without degrading the standard. And our society's not good at that. We either widen the pool and degrade the standard. And so therefore you have a lower bar for things and you have a declining, a lot of parts of the economy just are just worse quality in terms of the quality of services and the level of education and skills of in these corners of society where they've lowered the bar. Or on the other hand, you just keep the bar the same, but just have artificial means such as class size caps for medical school to keep people out. Whereas the solution is you keep the standards high, but you widen the amount of people who can participate. Like the best examples of this would be like flagship state universities, I think, are have a good balance for this. And there probably are other good examples like maybe CPAs and the CFA program for finance professionals too. Like anybody could take the test if they pay the fee and but they make it so that it's hard enough that only people who actually understand and fully grasp material pass the test. Uh, I don't know if I'm rambling a little bit here, but that's kind of maybe some of my insight on this.
No, no, no. I think that that was incredibly insightful. One thing that I would just want to add on the conversation about being discouraged when you see other individuals maybe benefiting more off less work or things of that nature. I think a lot of people ask, what's the point? What is the point of all of these things? On a lot of my videos that I discuss the labor force, I get a lot of comments of individuals saying that they're giving up. What's the point? Things of that nature. I think that one of the issues too with becoming a doctor is that you look at the statistical probability of you not achieving it, which I think that is a responsible thing to do. I think that in a lot of ways too, we need to start doing things for ourselves and not in a selfish way, but of I knew since I was in high school I wanted to be a YouTuber, but most importantly, what I wanted to do was provide value to individuals. So when I decided to leave my job and take a risk of this magnitude, I knew that the statistical probability of me achieving this was practically zero. It wasn't, the likelihood was not in my favor, but I knew that I needed to do it for myself. And then when you go to the fact of, yes, both of us are in the top 5%, neither one of us have those beachfront properties. I think it's because in a lot of ways we've chosen not to take just any brand deal. I have said no to actually every single one of them, mostly because I just don't believe it provides the most value to my audience. Um, but I really want to create it as a community. My number one priority is to provide value to individuals and to show that there's always hope, but to also make myself proud. And the reason that I say that is because I I spend so much time on videos that even when I have a video that performs well, if you just want to look at it analytically, I'm making about $2 an hour. So and sometimes I'm making in the cent range because of how long I spend on it. And so in ways I do get you could get discouraged by seeing another individual talk about Legos or something like that and they just made $400,000 last year or something of that nature. But I just think I'm doing this for myself. I'm going to need to fix the business standpoint at some point, but I'm still providing value and that's what matters. And you can see that that's what's allowed growth to be able to happen. So ultimately in a long-winded statement here. I just think that individuals need to remember that working hard is important for themselves and to make themselves proud.
Yeah, but with YouTube, unlike medical school, there isn't a fixed limit in supply. But in theory, there's no barrier to entry that's saying you can't be the next big YouTuber.
I agree. I think that I think that in some ways you could say, well, the likelihood of me becoming a doctor is zero. So let me become something else that'll just pay me a high amount, even if their passion is to become a doctor. I think that there's still a multitude of different avenues, especially with some of the new technological advancements, to maybe not be a doctor, but to still be able to help out drastically, to still be able to at least give it a shot. Because what you're doing is you're opening up other doors to avenues that are going to lead to other things as time goes on. I think that in some ways, a lot of individuals say 97% of businesses fail within the first year. Why would I start a business? Well, the journey is
Well,
what matters.
that's not a really good statistic anyway. First of all, I think it's like 90% failing in five. But also look at the type of people starting businesses and what risk really was taken. Like somebody starts a website, e-commerce store, and doesn't sell anything after a couple months. Is that technically a failed business, or is that just, especially they didn't really put much money in it? It technically is, but it's not. And how many people start businesses with very high failure rates, like restaurants and bars, and have no experience in those industries just because they thought it'd be cool to own a restaurant or a bar, and that really increases that statistic. Like if you start a business in a profession where you have a knowledge base in it, and experience, then your failure rate is going to be much lower than that statistic implies.
I agree. And I also want to just shift to a lot of individuals, like you mentioned, don't want to be, they don't want to be business owners. They don't want to be entrepreneurs. And that's completely fine. I think that then you just need to still work hard in the avenues that make you feel proud of what it is that you're doing. Because if you hate what you're doing, you're not making money. And then you don't even feel like the avenues where you could allow yourself some sort of gratitude or something of that nature. I think that's what makes things a lot of dangerous for what is the point of doing anything. I think it's
Yeah, there's a lot of careers I could have pursued that made more money than what I did in finance, even though people think finance is a high paying profession, and it generally is. But there's ones that pay even more, or if they pay the same but with a more stable income, which I declined to do just because I didn't find them interesting. And I would have hated my life for years and years and years doing some job just for the money. So you need to do something that motivates you to get up in the morning. Otherwise, um, the amount of just health problems to be created by living that inconsistency is going to cost more than the extra paycheck.
You're absolutely right. Well, Nick, I really appreciate your time. I think that your channel provides a lot of value to individuals, and I really like that it's very unbiased and very well researched. I think that that's very much needed. I'll make sure to link your channel below, and yeah, I really look forward to the next time we're able to chat.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, yeah, you kind of provide more of the personal finance side of things, and as my channel is more like the bigger structural macroeconomic issues that affect the lives of the viewers and why it matters to them.
I use a lot of your videos for some of the more analytical research that I do in my videos. So you've provided a lot of value to a lot of individuals. So myself included. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that this video was able to provide some sort of value to you. I went over to Nick's channel and we had a discussion about the devaluation of the US dollar and its impact on the economy as well as the incentivization for individuals to work. I really enjoyed that conversation and I believe that it provides a lot of value. Thank you guys so much as always. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.